Welcome to the Business Advice Podcast, where we discuss marketing, money, and other matters with businessmen around Australia.
Hey guys, welcome to the Business Advice Podcast. Today we're very excited to have Andrew Wilson here with us. As you can tell from his amazing beard, he's a wise and experienced business operator. And he actually has so much good advice for us today. I'm very excited. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Let me have a little introduction. I'll read it out for you guys. Andrew is a business owner who has started and operated, very key here, we might come back to that, a number of businesses in different domains across the last 25 years. And he's currently one of the directors of The Other Dimension, which we will go into later. And he's also a fractional chief marketing officer. And later on, we'll also cover he's also a founder of something called DWYS. Acronyms are always exciting, so you got to stay till the end to find out what it stands for. So, Andrew, let's jump right into it. You being a starter and an operator of a number of different businesses, is there anything in your childhood that actually spoke to the path that you would take later on in life?
I think my brothers and I were always interested in doing stuff from like neighborhood car washes and things like that. My father probably trained it into us a little bit, even though ironically he was never self-employed. He played with the idea of going into franchise models a few times and doing a few different things. But it was a little bit later in life looking at that, and you have the mortgage and the young kids and so on. And so therefore you stay with the security, whereas we got started before we had any of those things to worry about in terms of stability. So my first business was in garden maintenance and landscaping, which I started to put myself through uni while I was studying a BCom in marketing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
By the time I wrapped that up, I had other people working with me, and that's what gave me the freedom to spend time in the agency as I transitioned from one to the other.
Right.
In terms of, what led to it, we joke that we're a genetically bred advertising agency because our father was a marketing exec and our mother was an artist.
Okay.
Currently, our business with my two brothers, one of whom manages the digital side and the other one's the creative director. So there's enough overlap with what we each do and how we think. Yeah.
So both sides of the brain.
Yeah. Yep. Hopefully.
Okay.
Some of us leaning more into some skills than others. So I'm more strategic and analytical, and the other two are more creative. But there's enough overlap in the way we think, and in fact, that name came from a conversation we were having with a client early on before we'd put a brand to the agency, where we were talking about it's like we're spitballing ideas, and we're similar enough to each other that we think along similar lines, but we're also different enough that at some point our minds meet in the other dimension, and that's where the magic happens. And
right.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like from very early on, like uni days or pre-uni days, you decided it's not the normal conventional employment path for you.
Yeah, in the early days, I wasn't ruling it out. I was just doing what was near to hand and where the opportunity presented itself for me to start doing work, and then it built from there. And I enjoyed running my own business for those seasons where I thought I'm not beholden to someone else's schedule, although I soon learned that you become beholden to customer schedules, and it doesn't make things easier, but it did give me some flexibility, and I was learning a lot. And then I thought I was going to go down a particular path after uni, and again, opportunism. My brother was doing some work for clients where he needed my assistance, and then it turned into, well, this is getting busier, and let's form this into something. And then, 25 years I haven't worked for anyone else. I've worked for clients, but
we all do.
But I've worked for somebody else.
Yeah. Was there like one thing that drove you to decide, okay, let's start our own thing, as opposed to, I'm happy being one of these consultants? Or
I came into The Other Dimension fresh out of uni, so it wasn't about plotting a career path at that point. It was about the opportunity was there. I wasn't weighing it up, or should I leave something? But I've always liked the idea of captaining my own ship for better or worse,
Mm.
rather than relying on other people.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I think it was a natural fit for me, and it's probably hard for some people to make that initial shift. I reckon it's probably even harder to go backwards once you've done it.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine. So you mentioned risks, right? Was it just not a consideration, or was it actually you were just so good at things that there wasn't actually much practical risk?
It definitely wasn't that. It was probably more the security of the fact that when I started things, I was living at home.
Right,
I wasn't married. I didn't have any dependents. I didn't have a mortgage. The risks
mm,
of something not working, I wasn't injecting huge amounts of capital. I was just doing it in iterative stages,
right,
and building up. So I never saw it as a major risk. What I didn't assess very well was the risk of significant opportunity cost, as I spent too long doing things that I should have moved on from, because you get
okay,
up every
okay,
day and focus on doing the things which you were doing yesterday. And there's a great Drucker quote that says, "There's some, I'll probably butcher it, but there's no greater waste as doing things well which should not be done at all."
right,
Yeah,
right.
and I probably should have
Okay,
moved on from my first business much sooner than I
yeah.
did, because
Why
I was
didn't
spreading
you?
myself too thin. And they say that
Yeah,
unless you put yourself in a sink or swim position, you'll never learn how to swim, right? So you're
yeah.
sitting there spread thin
Comfort
across many
zone.
things and not doing any of them very well. And that's the position so there were risks. You
Mm,
tend to appreciate the real risk rather than the opportunity costs,
yeah,
of
yeah,
what should I have been doing better. Like if I was had my time again, I would have spent time in the corporate side, and sitting client side or in a major agency, learning
yeah.
about how things operate rather than doing it myself, because the core skills were there. But
Right,
what it
right.
takes to run and operate a business, I think, yeah, I had to learn a lot of things that I could have learned from other people's
Yeah,
failures,
rather than best
successes,
practices that
rather.
are diluted or like titrated from
Yeah.
other established agencies, right? Do you have a system now? Like you've figured out, okay, if you shouldn't have stayed that long. It's opportunity cost. Do you now know how to calculate that for yourself?
We do regularly run checks across how we're remunerating ourselves versus market
Mm,
salaries and opportunity costs of doing other things, and trading that
yeah,
off against the flexibility that we might get when we've got young families to take
right.
time away as and when we choose, and giving each other that sort of flexibility. It's
Yeah,
funny, back in the early days, I used to say to the guys, let's not make a big deal about the fact that we're a family business. Like, we're not a fruit shop or whatever. People want to think that we've got the best people here that have
yeah,
been brought to the table for any given task,
yeah, yeah,
rather
yeah.
than the fact that it's a convenience that we happen to be related. And I
Right.
was, the giveaway is our surname, right? Like, you talk to us, we probably sound pretty much the same. We don't look the same, but our emails are one letter different because it's just our first initial. So there's no
Okay.
hiding it. But then you get to the
Yeah.
point where actually now I consider it a strength, right? A lot of the clients that we've been with, like the fact that we're a bit more relaxed about things. It's not a body shop of people coming and going. It's
Yeah.
our business, so the vast majority of the time they're talking to us as the directors,
Right. Like
and
directly to you.
directly to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the case even when we had staff before. We've deliberately wound it back a little bit
Mm,
now. So I think there's a lot of strengths in that, and I can talk a little bit about my health journey over the last few years, but I wouldn't have swapped it for employment and some insurance policy elsewhere versus the strength of
right.
having two brothers who are like, "Mate, if the business can carry your wages while you do what you need to do, then so be it.
Mm,
Like, we can feed our
yeah.
families, then, you're still on the books and still a director and do what needs to be done, and then come back when you're ready."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think by now I've probably paid back, by several factors. But yeah, you might not
You've
get that
earned.
opportunity with a corporate employer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, were there challenges in the beginning, at least?
Yeah, I think probably, aside from what I mentioned before about spreading myself across
Yeah.
too many different things and staying too long in the first business,
Yeah.
um, we had another partner in the business earlier on which introduced some challenges. It's a tough gig for somebody coming outside a family business to join a family business as a partner, and then there's different dynamics there,
Yeah.
which is useful sometimes as a tiebreaker. And I think for a long period there, there was too much tension that worked itself into the business. And one of the things my father
Right.
said, he said, "Oh, we've set up this business." And he said, "Oh, that's great. But if you ever get to the Christmas table and you're staring daggers at each other because you've had some fallout in business, I'll be very upset."
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's a
there
fair
were
point.
some years we would never have let it destroy a relationship overall, because we were always closer than that. But so there were times when we wasted time discussing stuff. You're like, I never talked to a professional colleague like that, but because you're brothers, and so you get involved in discussions about peripheral stuff or beige or whatever. It's just we wasted some time there, and so we learnt over time that was a waste of time, and also, just realizing that what we were doing as a family business had far more benefits than drawbacks. And to cut each other some slack where we needed to cut each other some slack, and I think it's now become a strength. So we learnt, managing if you're starting business with a family, managing some of those dynamics, and some of that came from tapping external assistance. So we had a client who was also a facilitator, and his job was essentially working with the top end of town. If there was a board dispute or something, they'd call him in as a facilitator. So, we were small fry compared to that. And, he took us through an exercise where he said it was mapping out your personality traits. It was a Herman Brain Diagnostics Indicator or something like that. I can't remember the term, it was years ago. It's like 200 and something questions. And we map it out, and it was a spider graph. And on almost everything, my older brother and I, who was the only partner with me in the business at the time, were almost identical. And then you answer the questions again for how you act under conflict. And we were almost identical, except for one thing: we went in polar opposite directions. I would focus on the principle, and he would focus on the detail. You said you call this guy back, and I'm like, yeah, but I've worked 16 hours a day for the last 6 days. I haven't had an opportunity. He's like, yeah, but you said the expectation would have taken a few minutes to call. And I'm like, principle, and he's like, details. And there's not one of those that's necessarily, I'm not taking him, he's not here to defend himself, a view that my way was correct. But that just, as soon as we looked at that, we're like, it's so blatantly obvious. And then it happens again on some issue. And you're like, hey, we're doing this thing. We're doing that graph thing. And then, you approach it differently. And then, frankly, I think as Drew, we've just got a bit more.
Just knowing that that's the point of difference, it helps, right, with communication.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds so much
like...
It
also speaks to the value of external advice, right? And that's hard when you're running your own business. You don't know what you don't know in a lot of cases. And there's a reason why people do other things, right? So you get used to wearing all the different hats. And sometimes you can't afford the external advice. Sometimes, it's about, I can't give them the right information to give me the right advice. I've just got to tough it up myself. So, which also speaks to probably the best thing we ever did was create an admin role in the business, because even though we didn't have a huge amount of admin overhead, we didn't like doing it. It just weighed us down. So probably the week after we registered the business, this is how long ago it was. We went to Harvey Norman and we got the CD box for MYOB. The internet did exist then, but this is how these programs worked. And you would go and buy the box for the software. And we sat there in my brother's room, which was our office at the time. And he said, okay, so get out your laptop. Do you want to put that on there? I'm like, I'm putting it on my laptop. You put it on yours. I'm not doing it.
That's how bad.
All right. So then we went and got an accountant. But of course, accountants can only work with the information they're given. And so we spent ages giving them imperfect information and paying the cost of that until we went, we are not admin people. Let's say work to your strengths and outsource your weaknesses. And the people that do that well and do it quickly realize that it's a much faster path to success than trying to stick out things that you're not very good at.
Right. That's good advice. Like, can you say that again? Like, maximize the strength, or identify strength and outsource weaknesses?
Yeah. So, and you might cut out a bit for me there. So, but the view is you focus on your strengths and outsource your weaknesses, right? So getting an admin person in is obviously a fraction of the rate.
Is there a list of priorities? Would you give our listeners, is there a list of, okay, what kinds of weaknesses are ones that you can learn to upskill yourself to manage? What are some ones where you can just instantly write off admin and tax?
Oh, you're the psychologist, Dave. I think I'll put that one back to you. I think if you are, there's a balance in terms of self-awareness of being, I know this is an area that I need to work on. Like if I handle conflict poorly, and so therefore I avoid it, as opposed to I need to work through how I can have healthy disagreements so we can move forward, then that's not something you can directly answer. Maybe you could make someone else deal with it. But your conscience will probably guide you as to, is this something that I need to work on and that I'm doing badly? Or is it just something that's not my natural strength, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I like talking to clients about strategy and helping turn their visions into reality. I
Hmm.
don't like sending invoices. And frankly, particularly if you're a consulting business, having someone else send the invoices and follow up the invoices is probably
Yeah.
one of the best and earliest things that you can do.
Oh,
There's
awesome.
platforms out there that will help with that. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. Okay, that's good. So I hear so much like in your dynamics. It's intriguing for me because so many of my clients they start business with best friends, with mates,
Mhm.
or at least with investors, like people with money. And do you think the dynamic you've been working out with your brother is similar to starting a business with a mate?
Uh, yes and no, because that mate might be not at the Christmas table with their father, right? And you don't share the other family relationships. So you've still
Yeah,
got to work that out.
yeah,
And I think going into it, it's easy to get excited about, oh, we're doing this thing and it's potentially going to be worth a lot of money or it's going to give us these benefits.
yeah,
And some of those things can take a while to realize. And in the grind in between, there's sometimes tension, right? And
yeah.
so I have friends where I've said to my wife and family members, if I ever say I'm going to start a business with X,
Mm.
remind me not to do it because I can absolutely love them as a friend and
Yeah,
go,
yeah,
I just feel like this would be tension, right? Like when we talk
yeah,
about certain things, I go, we just think differently, and it's
yeah.
not the one's better or worse. I'm like, I'd lose a friend and I wouldn't gain a business because the business would fail.
That's a
And
good point. Yeah.
yeah, and so there's a fantastic book called The Partnership Charter,
Mm.
which basically sets you on a path for a process to say, what do I want out of this? So the
Hmm.
reason our other partner exited the business at one point. We were talking about what we wanted, and my
Yeah,
brother and I were talking about flexibility and opportunity and captain your own ship. And he
yeah.
said stability, predictability, and stuff. And you're like,
Oh wow,
right,
opposite.
those are very different things. And he was in a life stage where he was taking on a mortgage and looking after parents who retired and this sort of thing. And so we were like,
Right,
that made it
right.
pretty clear.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest parts of my role at the moment is working with business owners and generally in the startup space who have got
Hmm.
a whole bunch of things rattling around in their head and putting a process around getting those out in paper so there's
Right.
more clarity for
Yeah.
themselves and others they're working with.
Yeah.
And then you can turn those into strategy or action steps or how we're going to
Right.
get the vision realized
Right.
because you tend to think about a lot of things and get stuck on particular tracks
Right. Yeah. It's not
and
directional or strategic. Just a lot of things. Yeah.
yeah, and it just rattles around, and you're having conversations with one of the you put it down, and you have a framework or a structure to go through something. What do I want out of the business, and
Yeah.
what would I expect to happen if I got sick and couldn't work for 6 months?
Yeah.
What would I
Yeah.
expect if I wanted to be able to sell my shares? What would I expect if something happened to you? What do I expect if somebody offers to buy us out? Like, would I say,
Right.
yeah, if the
Right.
money's right, or no, we built this, and have those front load those conversations.
Yeah.
Um, and people say treat it like a marriage. The stats on marriage these days are pretty dire. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
that says anything for the endurance of marriage versus businesses. But if you go
Yeah.
into a marriage going, oh, we're in love and we've got all these feelings about what we're going to do, and you've never had a conversation about finances or understanding how family of origin
Yeah.
dynamics work, then you
Yeah.
might be headed for trouble, right?
For
So,
sure.
um, yeah, I think front loading conversations about what you expect so
Hmm.
that you know, and then you can even it out. And I'm working on setting up another business in an unrelated space for my wife. And there's a partner that wants to be 50-50 in the venture. And
Right.
they're saying, I'm not going to work in the business. Um,
Yeah.
but, I think I bring enough to the table to be 50-50. The conversation is, well, that might be okay.
Right.
Excuse me. But if you're not working in the business, then anyone who works in the business gets remunerated before the business declares any profits. It's
Right.
shared, right? And so what often happens to confuse things is people treat the business ownership and the employment as one and the same,
Right.
and
Right.
those can be different things. So
Mm.
yeah, that's probably a conversation for people's lawyers and accountants. But the concept is be clear on what you want and what you expect. And sometimes people haven't thought of it. They have
Right.
an idea what I want to do. What do you actually want out of it?
Yeah.
It is a different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned before on a personal note about spreading yourself too thin. What was that journey like?
Well, I'm 42 now, so it was about 40 years of it, probably. Well, cut me some slack and say from post high school then, and say about 25 years. But I've always had a strong work ethic. I've always been reasonably fit and active, and my view was keeping busy and doing a lot of activity.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Like
right?
so many of our listeners. Yeah. High capacity comes, just high function.
Yeah, and not all of that was productive activity, of course, and that's one question is, I was saying doing well, what should be done at all, or doing too many things half on being spread too thin. For me, part of that was I think I've always had a reasonable degree of self-awareness, but there was probably an unhealthy inability to stop and rest. Right?
Okay.
And if you take the analogy of cars, you want the fastest car over a short distance, get a top fuel dragster. But what they do with that is at the end of its run, they tear it down and they rebuild it at the top end of that racing, like every race, to my understanding, right? It's super high performance and it goes very, very hard for a short time period.
Yeah.
If you want to drive a car around for 30 years, you don't get a dragster, you get a Corolla, right?
Right.
So if you consider that you have a high performance brain, I'm not talking about intellectual capacity, but the desire to be actively engaged in doing and pursuing something.
Yeah.
Then it's equally important to give yourself time to rest and rebuild. And I never did it because I'm like, I enjoy what I'm doing. I'll just keep doing it. And if there's more opportunity to do more things, then I'll just keep doing more of them.
Right.
So I spread myself too thin and made myself less effective than I should be in each area.
Right.
And
just to give us a scope of how thin you spread yourself at your peak, how many pies were you in?
So I had a bit of a crash, which I can talk to shortly in terms of like just total burnout of energy and whatever. But prior to that, I was still a director in the agency and still actively involved in that.
Yeah.
I was spending the majority of my time working on a startup in the FinTech space. It's on ice at the moment, and as my health allows, it'll come back to the fore. So then I was helping my wife with a startup business as well, in an unrelated space. So I'd done a few trips back and forth to Italy for her. It's a fashion concept, basically.
Right.
So I was doing, midnight calls with Italy on stuff like that, and taking last minute trips and then landing and going straight back to the office to catch up time. So I wasn't cutting my brothers out of it. We had 3 children under 3 years of age. So I added to that mix.
Yeah.
And I was also involved with some political stuff, mostly on a voluntary capacity.
Right. Because you had so much time
on
to
the
spare.
weekends.
Yeah. Because you had so much time to spare on the weekends.
And then on the weekends I'd go, all right, well, I'll build a cubby house and re-landscape the yard for my family and stuff. And I loved it. And I was just always doing something.
Yeah.
And what I found talking to a lot of business owners is they're driven to be active, but they're also not very good at setting limits, which is why you hear about people basically burning out.
Yeah, that's the perfect equation.
And it's a bit of a trap, right? Because it's kind of enjoyable. I mean, more about the brain chemistry stuff than I do, Dave, but essentially you like the pursuit of something activates the reward circuitry as much as the attainment of something, right? And so constantly pursuing something but not taking moments to stop, to rest, to be content in the moment and stuff is it's a dangerous recipe.
Yeah. So at what point did you have to burn out for you to realize that, or what was the end of that like for you?
Yes, totally. Because if you'd said to me before, my best mate said to me, "Hey, how are you going with all this stuff? You got a lot on your plate. Are you doing all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I love it."
Yeah, you were frothing it, right?
All the
dopamine, the serotonin, it was all like
and all the stresses were positive things, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, your body can't discern the difference between what you're viewing as positive and negative stress. It's all stress.
Right.
And so you set things up for problems. And what people find is everyone's probably familiar with I had a week-long holiday. It took me the first 3 days to start relaxing. And then I started thinking about work in the last 2 days. And so I got a couple of days in the middle.
Yeah. Wait, isn't that normal? I think everyone right now is that way.
Yeah, I think it is. And so, everything's on a spectrum. It's how far you push that. If you're like, people talk about the prevalence of second screens while watching TV, right?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
I think a significant majority now haven't are paying attention to a second screen while something else is on, which is just
yeah,
massive amount of overstimulation. And we weren't designed to
for sure,
context switch like we
for
do.
sure.
Yeah. And I was good.
Yeah,
And then I said to my wife before the crash, I was like, my brain doesn't idle very well, but at least I feel like I'm maximizing the potential that I can do across each of
you
these.
actually said that.
Yeah. So I had that self-awareness and I'm going, okay, but
Yeah,
I would go, I heard a entrepreneur say once that he had a range of different businesses. He's been a fairly successful guy. And somebody said to him, how do you know where to focus your attention on any given day? And he said, you seen those guys that spin plates on sticks? He said, I wake up on any given morning and I go, oh, that one's wobbling. And so I went over and I shake the stick until it's not
yeah,
wobbling anymore. And
yeah.
like a totally reactive sort of sense. And I was like, well, if I'm walking 50 meters to the bus stop, I'll fire off an email to that bloke and I'll just stop that plate from wobbling a bit. And then I'll do that. And then I'll go, okay, well, I've got 5 minutes waiting for a client. I'll fire
Yeah.
off an email to Italy for my wife's business or whatever.
Right, right.
And each of the things there was nothing that I was doing individually that was a problem, but you combine them all together and it was just too much load, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And there are some people who can persist indefinitely
right.
with huge energy reserves, and not most people will find that it catches up to them in some form at some point.
Yeah, yeah. What form was that for you? Was it physical health?
What did that look like?
Yeah. Okay, okay. Yeah, what did it look like for you?
I woke up at 3 a.m. one morning with my heart absolutely racing. There was no particular stress.
Right.
It wasn't a particular, I think it was a
Right.
weekend night. And then that started happening every night where I would be waking up with, just like somebody had just jabbed me with a shot of adrenaline.
Wow.
I wasn't having nightmares or anything. It wasn't about anything in particular. And my blood pressure was like 180 over 130 at 3 in the morning.
Wow.
What had been happening before that actual crash was I've always had to eat regularly.
Yeah.
And I was having to eat every 90 minutes to avoid getting shaky and starting to feel panicky.
Wow.
And so that window had declined over probably 2 years prior. And I'd seen, I think I saw 5 doctors over the years going, look, it's not normal. Like, I'm okay with eating more regularly, and everyone knows me as the guy that eats, and I'm the picture of hangry, right?
Yeah.
And you would think I was not quite 40 at that stage, but as somebody of that age, that you would have the self-awareness to go, oh, maybe I should just eat something.
Right.
But if I was busy coming in from yard work on the weekend, my wife got to the point where she would, if I said something when I walked in, it was never, it was just outside my normal, right? Like I would never be saying anything abusive or whatever. She would just be like, he seems a bit cranky or whatever. She'd be like, she wouldn't respond to what I said. She would just say, do you need to eat? And I'd go, oh yeah, probably. Right? But it's the same with whatever is going on physiologically, like diabetics go into comas because their energy levels drop to a point where they can't, they're not functioning at a level that says, well, just go get some food and the problem goes away, right? They just slide and that's why it's so dangerous. So I ended up going through this process of wearing a continuous glucose monitor and seeing a whole bunch of doctors who might actually know what they were talking about, because I had 5 doctors all say, yeah, we did the basic checks and you're fine. Just eat well. How often is often though? Like every 90 minutes to have a substantial amount of food is a lot, right? And I wasn't putting on any weight, which is another marker that there's a problem there, because that amount of caloric intake is being burnt. So my body was just revving way too hard.
It was overclocked.
Yeah, and so I ended up with chronic fatigue, basically. So just I used to be on my bike all the time. I'd run a bit. I was physically active. Like I rode the Sydney-Newcastle overnight ride a few times. It's like 180 Ks and a decent amount of climbing and stuff. And then get a couple of hours sleep and you're back the next day. And I haven't been on a bike since then. So my energy's slowly recovering. And I'm not saying that's a trajectory that everyone will be on, because there's a whole
Right.
suite of stuff about the likely onset of chronic fatigue from various other factors, including heavy antibiotic use as a child, which upsets the gut microbiome, which sort of cascades.
Okay.
But it is a warning from somebody who couldn't be warned before because I'm fine, like I love it.
Yeah.
To just prioritize, like there's not a whole lot of people that go to church these days, but there was a 1 day in 7 was a rest day, right? And society lived by that rule for a very long time.
Yeah.
At least Western society, and that's been dropped. And this always on work thing is your brain's not getting rest when you're like, well, I can just check my emails and it just restarts that sort of process. And my downtime is, getting dopamine hits from social media for 3 hours until I'm done with the scrolling and I'm ready to pass out in bed.
Let's stimulate myself to rest.
I would just say prioritize rest and you will ultimately be more effective. And if you don't feel like you can, that's a marker that you need to structure in some way.
Yeah. How do you know now, given everything you've experienced, how do you know the difference between that feeling of, I love what I'm doing and I'm still spreading myself somewhat, not thin, but spreading myself? Because
fundamentally,
so many of our listeners, they're high functioning, they think they're still frothing it. Oh, sorry. Was I frozen?
Yeah. You were. How do I discern the difference between...
Yeah, how do you discern the difference? Or where your limit is?
It's not something that I necessarily feel. Like I definitely feel, when I'm in a massive energy, like I run a baseline energy deficit courtesy of chronic fatigue, which hopefully won't last for too much longer. But it's not one of those things you go, it's low on energy for a few weeks, right? That's not chronic fatigue. But I can feel the energy drain. But sometimes the energy that comes from being busy and stressful feels good, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a balance somewhere in between. You sit there and do nothing, and people say, on the weekend I get a headache. I'm stopping doing nothing. And now I just try and structure and go, it doesn't really matter how I feel. I'm going to stop and do this. So I'm going to start my day without, I basically don't open social media until at least midday.
Right.
I don't start the day by picking up my phone and finding out what's going on in the world. I stop looking at it by 9 o'clock and structure stuff in. I try not to task switch too much and do things that are good hygiene practices regardless of how I feel.
Yeah. That's exactly how I tell my clients. But structuring, because it's so interesting how in our society or in our brains, structuring does not equal rest. Like those two words don't really belong in the same sentence. We feel like structuring is about productivity and efficiency, but then rest is just about just being a couch potato or lack of structure. So for you,
there can be an active resting state where you're doing something that is, helping refuel you, right? So if that's, sitting and drawing with your children, or if your audience is younger, they may not have children yet, but it could be reading a book that you enjoy. The default rest state for society is scrolling through something on your phone, which is not rest at all. Like it's literally the opposite of rest as far as the neurocircuitry goes, because it's stimulation. And we've lost the ability to be bored. And you just sit down on the bus and you can tell yourself, but the stuff that I'm doing is productive, or I'm building a community of followers, or I'm doing all these things. And some of that may be true, but it'll come at a cost ultimately, which again might not be chronic fatigue. It might be that you don't get to enjoy rest. It might be that you're snappier with your family. It might be, for me, so I used to write a lot. One of the analogies is if you're always looking just in front of you, then you could, to make sure you don't, come off on a small rock, then you could ride off a cliff, right? So if you always focus on here and now, and you don't think about the long term, consequences might be massive. And if all you're doing is thinking about the long term, you miss what's directly in front of you and can cause you injury as well. So it's a balance of take a moment to lift your head literally away from your phone. There's a campaign on at the moment with billboards saying look up.
I've seen that.
It's interesting. You know who's behind it? Because they try and it's not exactly obfuscated, but it's not immediately obvious going, this is a good message, right? But who's behind it? The billboard company. Because how do you sell billboard space if everyone's looking at their phone?
It makes so much sense.
It's still good advice, but look up and stare at our billboard.
We misunderstood. We looked up higher than the billboard.
Yeah. Yeah, not that high. Look down a bit.
Yeah, high, just eye level is good.
But that concept of look up and assess, am I on the right trajectory or am I doing things that
That's
I
so
shouldn't be
good.
doing even if I'm doing them well?
Yeah,
And is what I'm doing now taking me in the right direction, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
and everybody would like to have a perfectly plotted out path that says I'm going from A to B.
yeah.
But generally, you go, you're on a highway. Are you going forwards or backwards? Is what you're
Mm,
doing now taking you in a forward direction or a backward
right.
direction? Like, is it damaging to your health or relationships or your productivity, or you start to get a sense that things are coming at a cost, and
Yeah.
then weigh that up, because otherwise you just get on the grind and everybody's proud of sort of hustle culture and stuff. I went to a conference a long time ago where they said, stand up if you own your own business. And it was a conference for people who own their own business. So the whole
Yeah.
room stood up. And I said, okay, sit down if you have to go into the office tomorrow for your business to operate. And, of course, it's down. Sit down if you have to go in this week. And then
Mm,
the last one, and people are sitting down in stages, he goes through this question. The last one was, sit down if you can't, send a note to somebody tomorrow saying, I'm going off grid on a trip to Italy for 3 months or whatever it
right.
was.
Right.
And there was one person left standing, and the presenter said, see this guy? He owns his business. Everyone else, your business owns you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
People talk about, yeah, I own my own business. Well, your business will own you, and you need to set
Yeah.
parameters and boundaries.
Yeah. That's really good. Okay. So, okay. So much here, so much that I could unpack, but I really want to get to the meat of it. DWIS, the acronym that probably everyone is dying to know by this point. Could you give us an intro on that?
You should be the marketing guy, right? You're doing the teasers now. Um, uh, I'll give you a quick backstory and then I'll answer the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, that would be perfect.
The startup that I was working on is called Nudge. So it was a FinTech that was based around using behavioral economics to get people to commit to behaviors that they knew they should do, but found difficult. In this
Oh,
case, savings, right? So
right,
it was described by one investor as Afterpay's Antichrist, right? Getting you to fight back against the whole current of have it
right.
now, shove it off on
Yeah,
Instagram, rinse and
yeah,
repeat to feel good about yourself, and get on the debt treadmill, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there was a kind of mental health component to that as well. Going, it's not good for society and people's mental health to be on
Right.
that.
It's behavioral psychology. Yeah,
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 and using that for a positive. And then I'd raised some capital for that already. We had the product live in market. We soft launched it, and then I was starting to raise the next round of capital when everything hit the skids, and I went, with my diminished work capacity, I can't take on extra
right.
funding in good faith from investors.
Yeah,
Well, but with that interest in behavioral psychology already, I was and then my own health journey as well, going like, if I didn't eat, I'd end up having a full blown panic attack. And
right.
the answer to that was not cognitive behavioral therapy, although I understand that can be useful, right?
Yeah,
But have a sandwich, right? And I'm going, there's a fundamental physiology there that's not being addressed. If you go to a psychiatrist and say I'm having panic attacks, they'll start you probably on some pharmaceutical. A psychologist can take you through CBT. Your
right,
GP will escalate you, right? And I'm going, there's something at play here, and I'm going to try and figure out what it is. Like, what's
right.
happening with my blood sugar? What's happening with,
Yeah,
there's insulin, ghrelin, there's a whole bunch of things like that,
yeah, yeah.
as well as the neurotransmitters everyone knows about.
Mm,
And you start to read all these testimonies of people who we're learning more and more about the gut-brain axis,
right. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah,
so the influence of your gut microbiome and your diet and environmental stuff on mental health.
yeah.
And so I was thinking about it. My mother was a prison chaplain,
Right,
and she's still kind of involved in those communities a bit. And so there's people that maladaptive behaviors or mental illness, the way society currently deals with it is, I'm going to say, largely ineffective.
right,
It helps people cope in some ways and
right.
takes the edge off
Yeah.
things, but there's a lot of people suffering.
Band-aids. Yeah,
Where their needs are not being met by the current system. And the whole gut-brain axis thing is this kind of emerging field of science. There's not a magic recipe for what your
right.
gut microbiome should be and so on, but there are principles, right, that
Yeah,
says if you don't have the gut microbiome that can convert tryptophan and tyrosine, like the precursors to dopamine and serotonin,
hmm,
in the opposite order, then you're going to have less of those neurotransmitters that you need, right?
right,
And
right.
so there are people who have had experiences of total healing from lifelong debilitating anxiety
Yeah.
by realizing they had a food sensitivity or taking probiotics, and
Right.
there's a whole field out there of stuff that's
Yeah.
not being addressed.
Sure.
And so I look at these things and I go, the problem is the pharmaceutical angle. And I'll be clear that I'm not saying to anybody, just go stop taking things that you've been prescribed, right? Because there's a danger in doing that regardless of, right? So just putting it out there. But there's nobody that's going to market to the same level that a pharmaceutical giant can, these alternative therapies. So there's things like antioxidants like NAC that, there's articles, this is turning psychology on its head because we had clients with severe OCD, and after they took this, which is it's not even a prescription thing, they were like markedly better, if not healed, which is kind of unheard of. And so there's this whole science of it, but there's also if you have trauma, taking probiotics and doing this stuff in your gut is not going to resolve that either, right?
Yeah.
And so we have these campaigns that say no to domestic violence, right? And we pump a lot of money into campaigns like that. And people, like there's no bloke that drives past and goes, oh, my suburb says no to domestic violence, and that's his trigger to go home and stop belting his wife, right? And you go, this is ineffective. It's preaching to the converted. And people's behaviours are an outcome of upstream trauma or problems that need to be resolved.
Absolutely.
And so and then I thought, so it's fundamentally a marketing problem, right? Is how do you get people to think, I need to do something about this that's either deal with the trauma, so that or it's deal with my gut health as a baseline, because I might as well do the things that are low risk of harm, that are easy to do, try a few of these things and see if some of it helps, right?
Yeah. And
it's either your and so that's either your figurative shit, like the trauma side, or your literal shit, which is the a fecal microbe test that is from your, right? And I thought,
I don't know how I can say that with a straight face, but that's brilliant. Okay.
So the concept is, if you can create something that is essentially meme worthy, right? Like, I don't know if you guys or your audience are old enough to remember the Not Happy Jan commercials for the Yellow Pages, right? Where, the setup for the ad was somebody forgot to put that in the Yellow Pages, a business went down, and then when they realized the employee responsible ran out the door, and the woman leans out the window and goes, "Not happy, Jan." People would say that about it. It's something that people started saying.
Right.
Yeah, from a marketing sense, if you can get a phrase to enter the vernacular of the common person,
that's it. Yeah.
that is gone. And I'm not setting this up to make any money from it, right? I've got enough other things that I'm working on that are commercial models. But just to say, if there are people out there that this could help, and we move the conversation away from just a straight awareness day, or, if you're, like I said, my experience was, well, we can send you to a psychologist to talk about this. And I'm like, yeah, but I know that if I ate a sandwich afterwards, I feel better. Right?
I know, yeah.
Something more going on there. That's
even as a psychologist, I'm like, don't pay me for the hour. Go have a sandwich.
Have a sandwich, right? Yeah. And so that's there's some low-hanging fruit to get people on a journey of improving their health. Like another stat is, there was a study done by the NIH in America where they found that supplementation of high-dose omega-3, like fish oil, in a prison population over a 3 to 4 month period reduced the incidence of violence by 37%.
Wow.
Like, you tell me some other program that's going to have that kind of efficacy, and it probably cost them $100 per inmate to do that, and no risk of harm, right? And you go, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, and people aren't aware. I'm a marketing guy.
Yeah.
I'd like to think I'm reasonably good at making people aware of stuff.
Yeah.
If we can get instead of our suburb says no to domestic violence, well, sure. But it's, how do you go from that to, I need to deal with my shit? Like it's a horrible example, and I think this is sort of fairly public knowledge now. But the example of the drunk and drug adult driver that ran over those 4 kids in Oatlands a few years ago, right? Three siblings and a cousin. He lived down the street from us, and his older sister died. Like, she had a chronic disease, and she was sick throughout, and he lived as a young child with her needing all this attention because she could essentially die at any point. And then she did subsequently die. She made it into adulthood, but she passed away.
Right.
The guy's clearly self-medicating away that pain, right?
Right.
And this is not saying, oh, let's go easy on him. What happened was horrific and he's responsible for the choices that he made. But I'm not interested at this point in blame. Like, everyone will agree, we want to avoid more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And if that means saying to people, like, deal with your shit, Gary.
Yeah.
It becomes something, it's like I'm proud to be a dealer. As in, like, I'm someone that's like, I've dealt with my shit, whether it's whichever one it is. I think that's one way of starting to make a dent on the mental health crisis that's facing most countries in the Western world. And so it's a whole other topic. What's happening at a systemic level that means that it's happening there's correlations in Western developed nations that we're not seeing in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
That's a whole other rabbit hole. But we know that spending more on things that don't work is a really bad idea, and that's what we consistently seem to be doing, right? So
which is really good.
With DWYS is my marketing entry into that kind of fray.
Love it.
Nothing up there yet, but if people want to put their email in, I set up a holding page, dwys.net.
Yeah. I love that.
Kind of pains me to be really dealing with the .net.au email as a marketing guy.
Okay. So last thing for today, as with all episodes, I'd love to hear your advice as well. What is one advice? There's just so much that you've mentioned, but what is the one advice you would give to young men today who want to pursue a similar path as you, either as a chief marketing officer or someone who starts and operates their own business? What is the advice?
Be clear and spend deliberate time figuring out what you want to do and why you want to do it. As opposed to, I've come up with an idea, right? So that
right.
I probably should have mentioned earlier, but ideas, people say it's $1 million idea, and so we'll go and try and sell it for $1 million, right? That's is people don't buy ideas, they buy the execution of ideas.
Yeah.
Ideas are easy. So people say, oh, I had that idea before, and look, it's a huge business. Well, 10,000 people had the idea, 1,000 people wrote a business plan, 100 people kept on knocking on doors, 10 people quit their jobs to do it, one person succeeded, and 10,000 people say, that's my idea.
Right, yeah.
I don't do that because I'm aware of that lesson. But the huddle streaming thing, I'd flagged that as a potential startup concept a few years ago, and I saw it there, and someone did it. Good. I'm not claiming any credit because I know what it takes to get it to the level they've got it to now.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would be clear on what you're wanting to do and why you're wanting to do it, and then be realistic, because it's hard. And having an idea, it does not entitle you to an income from that idea. Right. Execution is the bit where you get up every day and you push on against the barriers, and you do things that others are not willing to do, because the other saying is, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right?
Exactly.
So, and then work, figure out who you need. If I say to people, so if I wanted, unconditional support for my ideas, I'd go ask my wife. Right? She loves me, and she's like, if you choose to do something, then I will support you. But find people who will give you reasonable advice about whether what you are pursuing is sustainable, whether it has a market. There may be a niche in the market, but is there a market in the niche? It starts with an idea, but an idea is never going to make you rich. The execution might make you rich, and it's often a different skill set. Ideas people are people that are often excitable and enthusiastic, and execution people are often the ones that the ideas people might see as boring, right? But you might need to partner up with somebody like that says, I've got the vision and I need you to help me execute it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. There's so much gold in there. I think our listeners are really going to love this episode. And thank you for your time, Andrew.
Thank you, guys. It's great time.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Business Advice Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.